Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we turn our attention to Salem and to one of the most unsettling chapters in early American history. This is a story about fear, belief, and the strange power of accusation. It began in a small colonial community, but it grew into a crisis that still shapes the way we think about justice today. What makes Salem so fascinating is not only what happened, it is how quickly ordinary life changed once people believed danger was hidden among them. A courtroom began to listen to invisible claims. Neighbors became witnesses against neighbors. Certainty became more powerful than proof. And yet, this history is not only dark, it is also deeply human. It asks how communities protect themselves from panic. It asks why evidence matters. It asks what can happen when fear is given authority. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Allow your breathing to slow. And as the day begins to fade away, join me as we explore the mysterious story of Salem Witchcraft together. Let's begin. Salem's witchcraft crisis began with children acting mysteriously in winter. In the cold months of 1692, a strange disturbance began inside a minister's home in Salem Village. Two young girls suffered fits that frightened the adults around them. Their bodies moved in ways witnesses could not easily explain, and their speech seemed troubled by something beyond ordinary childhood illness. A local doctor reportedly found no clear natural cause, which made the situation feel even more alarming to a community trained to see spiritual meaning in suffering. But first, the matter was private and domestic. It belonged to a household, a hearth, and a frightened family. But in a place where religion shaped daily life, unexplained behavior could quickly become public concern. Neighbors listened. Adults interpreted. Rumor gathered strength. What began as a puzzling winter episode became the spark for one of the most famous legal crises in colonial America, showing how mystery can grow when fear is waiting nearby. Over 200 people were accused across the wider Salem region. The story is often remembered as if it happened in one small place, but the alarm spread far beyond a single village. Accusations reached across communities in Essex County and pulled many households into uncertainty. Farmers, church members, servants, mothers, widows, and respected elders all found that reputation could change almost overnight. Some people were formally examined by magistrates. Others were named in rumors that left no official paper trail, but still carried a heavy social cost. This wide reach is one reason Salem remains so powerful in memory. It was not a single argument between a few individuals. It became a regional storm of suspicion, fed by conversation, testimony, and anxious expectation. The scale reveals how quickly a community can become convinced that danger is everywhere. It also reminds us that each name belonged to a real person with a home, a history, and people who loved them. The trials revealed how fear can spread through an ordinary village. One of the most fascinating things about Salem is how normal the setting was before the crisis began. This was not a strange or isolated world beyond understanding. It was a farming community with church meetings, property disputes, family responsibilities, and daily work. People worried about crops, taxes, illness, weather, and reputation. Then fear entered that familiar world and changed the meaning of almost everything. A glance could seem suspicious. A disagreement could look dangerous. A memory from years before could suddenly be retold as evidence of hidden malice. The ordinary became charged with frightening possibility. That is why Salem still feels so close to us. It shows that panic does not always arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes it moves through trusted conversations and official questions. Sometimes it turns neighbors into investigators. The village became a lesson in how fear can reorganize everyday life from the inside. Most accusations grew from local quarrels, rumors, and old resentments. The accusations did not appear in a blank social landscape. Many people already knew one another's weaknesses, conflicts, debts, sharp words, and family histories. In a close village, memory could be long. A disagreement over land might linger for years. A quarrel about church matters could leave households cold toward one another. A woman who spoke boldly, lived poorly, or depended on charity might already be watched with suspicion. When the crisis began, old stories found new meaning. A harsh comment could be remembered as a threat. A sick animal could be linked to a neighbor's anger. A strange feeling could be fitted into a pattern people thought they recognized. This does not mean every accusation was calculated. Fear can make old grievances feel newly important. Salem shows how private tension can become public danger when a community begins searching for hidden enemies and finds them among familiar faces. The crisis unfolded inside a colony already shaken by war. Massachusetts in 1692 was not calm beneath the surface. The colony had recently lost its old charter, gained a new government, and faced violent conflict along the northern frontier. Families had heard reports of raids, displacement, and captivity. Some refugees from the borderlands carried memories of terror into safer towns. For people living in this world, danger did not feel theoretical. It felt close, unpredictable, and sometimes impossible to understand. That wider insecurity helps explain why fear in Salem could grow so quickly. A community already under pressure may look for patterns, causes, and enemies. In Puritan thought, worldly trouble often had spiritual meaning, so political uncertainty and wartime anxiety could deepen the sense that invisible forces were at work. Salem was not a peaceful stage suddenly interrupted by panic. It was part of a colony living with pressure, and pressure can make suspicion feel like vigilance. Spectral evidence allowed dreams and visions into a courtroom. One of the most astonishing parts of Salem's legal story is the way unseen experiences were treated as meaningful testimony. Accusers described being harmed by the shape or spirit of an accused person, even when that person's physical body was somewhere else. To modern ears, this sounds impossible to test. To many people at the time, it seemed frighteningly plausible. They believed the devil could operate through hidden means, and that spiritual attacks might leave real effects. The legal problem was enormous. How could a court judge something no one else could see? How could an accused person defend against a vision? This question troubled some ministers and later became central to criticism of the trials. Spectral evidence made the boundary between belief and proof dangerously thin. It allowed private experience to enter public judgment, and that made the courtroom feel less like a place of certainty than a stage for fear. 19 accused people were hanged before the trials finally ended. This fact sits at the heart of the tragedy, but its historical meaning is larger than the number itself. The executions took place after formal proceedings, which means the crisis was not only a matter of rumor or mob anger. It passed through courts, magistrates, judges, testimony, and written records. That is what makes Salem so disturbing and important. The machinery of law gave structure to fear, and official action made the accusations far more powerful. The people condemned came from different backgrounds, and several had maintained their innocence to the end. Their fate later forced Massachusetts to ask difficult questions about evidence, conscience, and responsibility. In the years that followed, regret did not arrive all at once. It came through petitions, reversals, apologies, and compensation efforts. Salem's memory endures because it shows that legal systems can fail when certainty outruns proof, and when fear is mistaken for truth. The Salem trials helped reshape American ideas about justice. Long after the crisis ended, Salem became a warning about the need for fair evidence and careful procedure. The trials showed how dangerous it could be to accept claims that could not be tested. They also revealed the risks of public pressure, especially when authorities feel driven to act quickly. Later generations looked back at Salem when discussing due process, wrongful accusation, and the moral duty to question popular panic. The story entered sermons, histories, court discussions, school lessons, and political language. It became a shorthand for what can happen when accusation becomes easier than defense. This influence did not turn Salem into a simple lesson overnight. Memory changed over time, and people argued about what the crisis meant. Yet the central warning remained strong. Justice depends not only on laws, but on the courage to demand proof. Salem helped Americans see that fear can wear the clothing of righteousness. Salem became a lasting symbol of panic, belief, and caution. Few local events have traveled so far through cultural memory. Salem is now known well beyond Massachusetts because it speaks to a pattern people recognize across history. A community feels threatened. A story takes hold. Doubt becomes difficult. People with authority make choices that later generations struggle to understand. This symbolic power has made Salem appear in plays, novels, classrooms, museums, and political arguments. Sometimes it is used carefully. Sometimes it is used too loosely. But the reason it keeps returning is clear. Salem gives a name to the moment when fear becomes organized and moral certainty becomes dangerous. It also invites a more compassionate kind of attention. The people involved were not characters in a legend. They were living within the ideas and pressures of their time. To remember Salem well is to hold two thoughts together. The past was different, and human vulnerability has not disappeared. The first afflicted girls lived inside Reverend Samuel Parris's household. The crisis began in a home that was already under close public attention. Samuel Parris was the minister of Salem Village, which made his household more than a private family space. It was connected to the spiritual life of the community. When troubling behavior appeared there, it carried special weight. People expected a minister's home to represent order, discipline, and godliness. Any disturbance inside it could feel like a warming. The household included children, relatives, and enslaved people, all living within a strict religious culture and under the pressure of village conflict. That setting matters because the earliest events were interpreted through the authority of the minister's position. A mystery in another home might have remained local gossip. A mystery in this home became a matter of collective concern. The location gave the first signs of seriousness that helped draw neighbors, officials, and eventually the wider colony into the unfolding story. Betty Parris was only 9 when the strange episodes began. The youth of one of the first afflicted children is easy to overlook, but it changes the emotional shape of the story. A 9-year-old in Puritan New England lived under intense expectations. Children were taught religious discipline early, and adults often viewed their souls as deeply vulnerable. When Betty began sharing symptoms that alarmed her family, the adults around her searched for meaning within the beliefs they already held. Childhood did not protect her from becoming central to a public crisis. Instead, her distress became part of a larger story, told by grown people with authority. This is one of the unsettling human details of Salem. Children's experiences were treated as important, but children did not control how adults interpreted them. Betty soon faded from the center of events, yet her early role remained crucial. A frightened child helped open a door that an entire community then walked through. Abigail Williams helped turn private fear into public alarm. Abigail was older than Betty Paris and became one of the most visible early accusers. Her role mattered because she helped give shape to the fear that was gathering around the minister's household. In the beginning, the strange behavior might still have been treated as illness, mischief, or family trouble. Once accusations began, the situation changed. Names gave the fear direction. Specific people could be questioned. Authorities could become involved. Abigail's testimony and conduct helped move the crisis from private anxiety into official action. She lived in a world where young people were expected to obey adults, yet her words suddenly carried extraordinary power. That reversal is part of what makes Salem so compelling. A girl with little formal status could influence magistrates and unsettle established households. Her presence reminds us that social power can shift dramatically during moments of panic, especially when adults believe a child is revealing hidden truth. Tituba's confession gave Salem a story too vivid to ignore. Tituba was enslaved in the Paris household, which placed her in a vulnerable position from the beginning. When she was accused and questioned, her response changed everything. Rather than simply denying the charge, she gave a dramatic confession that seemed to confirm the fears already rising in Salem Village. She spoke of forces, figures, and signs that listeners understood through their own religious imagination. Her words did not calm the situation. They expanded it. A confession could make invisible danger feel organized and real. It suggested that more people might be involved, which encouraged officials to keep searching. Tituba's background has often been retold with speculation, but the most important point is clear. She was a person with very little power, caught in a dangerous system. Her testimony became powerful because others wanted it to explain what frightened them. In Salem, a vivid story could become a map for further fear. Sarah Good was already vulnerable before anyone named her. Sarah Gould stood near the margins of village life, and that made suspicion attached to her more easily. She was poor, often dependent on others, and remembered by some neighbors as difficult or sharp in speech. In a society that prized order, charity, and religious discipline, poverty could carry a moral shadow. People sometimes interpreted hardship as evidence of disorder, even when hardship had ordinary causes. This placed Sarah in a precarious position before the crisis ever began. When accusations were made, her reputation offered little protection. Neighbors could connect old discomfort to new fear. A request for help that had ended badly might be remembered differently once witchcraft entered the conversation. Her case shows how accusation often finds those who are already exposed. Salem was not only about belief in the supernatural. It was also about social vulnerability and about how quickly a struggling person could become a believable target. Sarah Osborne's local disputes made suspicion easier to believe. Sarah Osborne had lived through conflicts that made her stand out in the village's memory. She was connected to arguments involving property, family inheritance, and household choices that some neighbors judged harshly. In a small community, such matters did not remain private. They shaped reputation, and reputation shaped credibility. When the first accusations emerged, Sarah's past made her easier for some people to imagine as dangerous. That is one of the recurring patterns in Salem. The accused were often not random names pulled from the air. They were people already surrounded by stories. Those stories might involve disagreement, resentment, independence, or failure to fit expected roles. Once fear took hold, older tensions could be reinterpreted as signs of hidden wrongdoing. Sarah Osborne's case helps reveal the social machinery beneath the crisis. Witchcraft accusations sounded spiritual, but they often traveled along pathways that village life had already worn into place. Salem Village had argued for years about its own minister. Before the crisis, the village had already struggled over religious leadership. Ministers came and went, and disagreements over salary, housing, authority, and church membership left marks on the community. In Puritan New England, a minister was not simply a Sunday preacher. He was a moral guide, a public teacher, and a symbol of spiritual order. Conflict over that role could divide households deeply. Some villagers wanted a stronger local church. Others resisted the costs or disliked particular leaders. By the time Samuel Parris arrived, the community had a history of frustration and faction. This matters because a divided religious community may respond to fear with less trust and more suspicion. When the strange events began, Salem Village was not united behind a calm center. It was already debating who should lead, who should pay, and who truly belonged. The witchcraft crisis grew in soil that had been unsettled for years. Reverend Parris arrived in Salem Village with enemies already waiting. Samuel Parris did not create every division in the village, but he became a focus for many of them. His ministry began in a community that had repeatedly struggled to support and keep ministers. Disputes over his contract, firewood, salary, and residence became part of a larger argument about authority. Some villagers saw him as a necessary spiritual leader. Others viewed him with resentment or suspicion. This placed him in a difficult position before the crisis began in his own household. When accusations arose, his supporters and opponents did not hear events in the same way. For some, the disturbance confirmed the presence of serious spiritual danger. For others, the situation later seemed tied to a ministry already marked by conflict. Parris's role is fascinating because it shows how leadership can become entangled with fear. A minister expected to guide a community instead found himself standing near the center of its unraveling. The meeting house became the emotional center of the crisis. In Salem Village, the meeting house was more than a building. It was where people worshipped, listened to sermons, settled public matters, and watched one another as members of a shared moral world. During the examinations, that space became charged with extraordinary tension. Villagers gathered to hear accusations, observe the afflicted, and watch the accused respond under pressure. The setting mattered because public emotion can change the force of testimony. A cry, a gesture, or a sudden movement could affect everyone present. People did not experience the crisis alone. They experienced it together, in a room shaped by religion and authority. The meeting house turned fear into a shared event. It gave the invisible a public stage and made each examination feel like a test of the whole community. Understanding that space helps us imagine Salem not as distant paperwork, but as a crowded room where belief became contagious. Village factions shaped who was trusted and who was doubted. Salem Village was full of relationships that mattered when the accusations began. Families had allies, rivals, church connections, property interests, and long memories of disagreement. These networks influenced how people understood the crisis. A statement from one household might sound convincing to its friends and suspicious to its opponents. A person already considered troublesome could be doubted more quickly. A respected church member might shock the village if accused, precisely because their reputation seemed protective. This is what makes the Salem story richer than a simple tale of superstition. It was also a story of social position. Trust did not fall evenly across the community. It followed lines that have been forming for years. During the crisis, those lines became sharper. The village's internal divisions shaped whose fear carried authority and whose denial seemed weak. Salem reminds us that truth can struggle when a community has already decided who deserves belief. Old land disputes quietly fed the fire of accusation. Land, meant far more than soil in Salem Village. It meant security, inheritance, influence, and a family's place in the future. A boundary line could decide where animals grazed, where children might build homes, and whether a household felt independent or trapped. When neighbors disagreed over fences, deeds, or rights of way, those arguments could last for years. They were remembered at church. They were repeated at tables. They shaped how people judged one another's character. During the witchcraft crisis, these older tensions did not need to be spoken loudly to matter. They were already part of the atmosphere. A family that had lost a dispute might be slower to trust. A neighbor with a history of conflict might seem easier to suspect. Salem's danger was not only found in dramatic accusations. It also grew from practical concerns that every farming community understood. Land made memory physical, and memory made suspicion easier to believe. Salem Village and Salem Town were two very different communities. The name Salem can make the place sound simple, but there were two connected worlds with different pressures. Salem Town was a busy coastal center with trade, wealth, and a stronger commercial identity. Salem Village lay inland with farms, scattered households, and long arguments about independence from the town. The village wanted more control over its own church and local affairs, yet it still remained tied to the larger town in practical ways. That tension mattered. People in the village could feel overlooked, burdened, or divided about where their loyalties belonged. In a small society, those feelings did not stay abstract. They shaped who trusted whom, which families gained influence, and whose version of events sounded believable. Understanding the difference between the village and the town makes the crisis more vivid. Salem was not one united place that suddenly lost its balance. It was already a community under strain. Families near the village edges often felt pulled in two directions. The outer parts of Salem Village lived with a strange kind of belonging. Some households were tied to the village meeting house, yet their trade and friendships leaned toward neighboring towns. Others felt closer to Salem Town, where commerce and opportunity had a stronger pull. This created more than a map problem. It shaped identity. A family might pay attention to village arguments while also depending on people beyond the village line. In a period when local loyalty mattered deeply, that divided position could make trust feel uncertain. Were these households truly part of the village community, or were they standing half outside it? During the crisis, geography could become social meaning. Distance from the center might make someone seem less involved, less reliable, or less protected by familiar alliances. The edges of Salem were not empty spaces. They were living borders where loyalty, resentment, and anxiety could meet. Salem Town's busy harbor made it wealthier than Salem Village. Along the coast, Salem Town looked outward to the Atlantic. Ships moved through its harbor with goods, news, and ambition. Trade brought money into the town and gave its leading families a broader connection to the world beyond Massachusetts. Inland, Salem Village lived by a slower rhythm of farms, fields, livestock, and local obligations. The contrast mattered because wealth often shapes how people imagine fairness. Villagers could see the town as powerful and distant, while town leaders could view village complaints as troublesome or expensive. The town's commercial confidence also made the village's dependence feel sharper. A farmer worried about land and taxes was living a very different life from a merchant watching cargo arrive. These differences did not directly create the crisis, but they helped form the background mood. Salem was divided by economy as well as geography, and those divisions gave ordinary frustrations a deeper force. Economic tension made ordinary disagreements feel more dangerous. Money troubles can make a community listen differently. In 17th century New England, people depended on credit, barter, seasonal harvests, and reputation. A failed crop or unpaid debt could ripple through many households. When resources felt uncertain, conflict became harder to absorb. A request for help might feel like a burden. A dispute over payment might become a judgment of character. A poor neighbor could be seen as morally suspect, while a successful neighbor could be resented for influence or pride. This is the human pressure beneath Salem's official story. Witchcraft accusations belong to a religious and legal world, but they moved through lives shaped by practical need. People were not floating above material worries. They were feeding families, defending property, and trying to hold a fragile place in society. Economic strain made the village more combustible. It turned small disagreements into signs of deeper disorder. Many accusers came from households tied to the village church. The church stood at the heart of moral life in Salem Village, and the families closest to it held a certain kind of influence. Their words could carry the weight of piety, discipline, and belonging. When people connected to these households reported affliction or suspicion, others were more likely to listen with seriousness. This does not mean every listener agreed without question. It means the social setting gave some voices a powerful platform. In Puritan communities, church membership was not casual. It marked a person as spiritually examined and publicly recognized. Households linked to that inner religious circle were watched closely and often trusted more readily. During the crisis, that trust became important. Accusations did not travel as anonymous whispers alone. They came from people whose family connections made them harder to dismiss. Salem reveals how spiritual status can shape public belief, especially when a community thinks it is defending itself. Some accused people had challenged authority long before the trials. A surprising number of accused people were not passive figures in their communities. Some had argued, resisted, spoken sharply, or refused to fit expected behavior. In a world that prized hierarchy and obedience, that kind of independence could be remembered. A person who challenged a minister, quarreled with neighbors, or ignored social expectations might already seem unsettling to others. When accusations began, such histories could be reinterpreted as signs of deeper danger. The past became evidence in people's minds, even when it proved little. This pattern is important because it shows how reputation can become a trap. A strong personality might be admired in one setting and feared in another. Salem's crisis gave old judgments a new language. It turned social discomfort into spiritual suspicion. The accused were not all alike, but many had already been noticed. In a moment of panic, being noticed could become perilous. Puritan belief made invisible forces feel painfully close. To understand Salem, we have to enter a world where the unseen was not distant or symbolic. For many Puritans, spiritual forces were part of daily reality. God governed history. Satan worked against human souls. Providence could be read in illness, weather, success, and misfortune. This did not make people irrational in their own minds. It gave them a complete framework for interpreting experience. A sudden sickness might call for prayer and self-examination. A strange disturbance might suggest a hidden moral problem. The invisible world was believed to press closely against the visible one. That closeness made fear feel urgent. If evil could act through ordinary events, then ordinary events required careful attention. Salem's tragedy grew inside this worldview. People searched for meaning because they believed meaning was everywhere. The past becomes more understandable when we see how deeply spiritual explanation shaped what counted as reality. The devil was treated as a real legal threat. In colonial Massachusetts, the devil was not only a figure in sermons. He was considered an active enemy of the Christian community, and the law reflected that belief. Witchcraft was feared because it suggested cooperation with a power that threatened both individual souls and public order. This is why accusations could move from private alarm into courtrooms. Authorities believed they were dealing with a crime that endangered the whole colony. To modern listeners, the idea of prosecuting an unseen spiritual enemy may seem impossible. But for the people involved, the danger felt immediate and organized. They saw themselves as a covenanted society, responsible for resisting corruption. A suspected witch was therefore not treated simply as a person with strange habits. The accused was imagined as part of a larger spiritual battle. This belief gave the legal proceedings their intensity. It made doubt feel risky and action feel necessary. Witchcraft was considered both a sin and a colonial crime. The power of a witchcraft accusation came from its double meaning. It belonged to the soul and to the courtroom at the same time. In religious terms, it suggested a terrible turning away from God. In legal terms, it could be prosecuted under laws inherited from England and adapted within colonial society. This overlap made the charge especially dangerous. A minister could preach about its spiritual meaning, while magistrates could investigate its legal consequences. The accused person faced not just public dislike, but a claim that touched the deepest fears of the community. Salem's records show this fusion of worlds. Questions about prayer, church attendance, character, and supernatural harm could stand beside legal procedure. The result was a system where moral suspicion and criminal accusation strengthened one another. It is one reason the crisis moved with such force. The law and the pulpit spoke different languages, but they pointed toward the same fear. Ministers warned that hidden evil could disguise itself as goodness. Puritan preaching often taught that danger was not always obvious. Evil might appear beneath respectable surfaces, which made self-examination and vigilance essential. This idea had a powerful effect during the Salem crisis. If hidden wickedness could wear the appearance of virtue, then a good reputation did not fully protect anyone. A church member, a neighbor, or a person known for decent behavior might still be suspected if accusers claimed invisible harm. That possibility made the situation deeply unsettling. Communities rely on signs of trust, such as habit, reputation, and shared worship. Salem's fear weakened those signs. It suggested that ordinary judgment might be deceived. Ministers did not all respond to the trials in exactly the same way, and some urged caution. Yet the broader religious teaching about concealment shaped the imagination of the time. It made people wonder whether the safest face could hide the greatest threat. Dreams could become testimony when judges accepted spectral evidence. A dream usually belongs to the private world of sleep, but in Salem, it could enter public life with startling force. If a person claimed to see the shape of an accused neighbor harming them in a vision, some officials treated that report as relevant. This gave inner experience a legal weight that seems extraordinary today. The difficulty was obvious even then. A dream cannot be cross-examined in the same way as a physical action. No witness can confirm exactly what another mind has seen. Yet in a culture that believed spirits could operate beyond ordinary sight, such experiences could appear meaningful. The courtroom became a place where the boundaries of waking life were not always secure. This made defense nearly impossible in some cases. How do you prove you did not appear in someone's sleep? Salem's use of spectral claims reveals a justice system struggling with the invisible. A simple touch was sometimes believed to calm an afflicted person. In the Salem examinations, observers sometimes believed that contact with an accused person could stop an afflicted person's fit. The idea was strange but persuasive to many people in the room. If the sufferer quieted after being touched, that change could seem like a sign of hidden connection. To those who believed in witchcraft, the accused person appeared to possess some mysterious link to the suffering. Yet the moment was open to many explanations. Emotion, expectation, exhaustion, and performance could all shape what happened in the crowded room. The power of the touch lay partly in how everyone watched it. Public attention transformed a physical gesture into a dramatic test. A hand placed on an arm could become a clue. A calm breath could become a sign. Salem shows how easily the body can be made to speak for a theory that people already fear might be true. The touch test gave fear the appearance of proof. The problem with the touch test was not that it convinced everyone equally. It was that it created a visible moment for invisible suspicion. People longed for something they could see. They wanted a sign that would separate truth from uncertainty. When an afflicted person seemed to improve after contact, the room had its spectacle. It looked like confirmation. But this was not reliable evidence. It depended on timing, suggestion, emotion, and the expectations of observers. A community already frightened could treat coincidence as revelation. That is what makes the practice so fascinating and troubling. It shows how humans search for patterns under pressure. We often feel more confident when a belief has a physical display attached to it. In Salem, that display could help move suspicion forward. The touch test did not solve the mystery. It gave the mystery a shape that people could point to. Confession often seemed safer than denying the impossible charge. For some accused people, confession could look like the only path toward survival. Denial placed a person in direct conflict with accusers, magistrates, and a community already frightened. Confession, by contrast, could make an accused person useful to the court. A confessor might be asked for names, details, and stories that seemed to reveal a wider threat. This created a dangerous incentive. The system rewarded people who confirmed its fears and punished those who refused. A confession did not always mean genuine belief or guilt. It could be a strategy shaped by pressure, exhaustion, and hope. Salem becomes especially revealing here because it shows how legal processes can produce the evidence they seek. Once a confession was accepted, it strengthened the idea that the danger was real. Then more questions followed. More names could appear. The act of confessing became not an ending, but a doorway. Accusers sometimes described invisible attacks inside crowded rooms. The examinations were not calm exchanges of questions and answers. They were intense public events where afflicted people sometimes cried out that unseen forces were harming them. These claims could happen while the accused stood nearby under watch. To observers who believed in spectral activity, the scene was terrifying. They thought they were witnessing hidden violence made visible through suffering bodies. The accused might protest innocence, but the room's attention often shifted toward the person in distress. That imbalance mattered. Physical display can overwhelm spoken denial. In a crowded setting, emotion spreads quickly. People look where others look. They react to sound and movement before they carefully weigh logic. Salem's examinations used this charged atmosphere as part of the process. The result was a kind of courtroom drama where invisible claims seemed to produce visible effects. It was compelling to witnesses, but deeply dangerous for justice. Courtroom spectators watched ordinary gestures become meaningful signs. Imagine sitting in a packed room where every movement is noticed. A turn of the head, a folded hand, a glance toward the afflicted could suddenly seem important. During the Salem proceedings, spectators were not passive decorations. Their attention helped create the emotional pressure of the moment. The accused lived under an intense gaze. Ordinary human behavior, shaped by fear and confusion, could be read as suspicious. If someone looked nervous, that might be taken as guilt. If someone remained calm, that could seem unnatural. The crowd's presence made the examinations feel like communal judgment before any final decision was reached. This is one of Salem's most powerful lessons. In a frightened society, observation is not neutral. People interpret what they see through the story they already believe. The courtroom was not only a place of law. It was a place where meaning was made in real time by watching eyes. Some magistrates believed they were defending the entire colony. The officials who questioned the accused did not see themselves as villains in their own story. Many believed they faced a threat that could endanger families, churches, and the moral covenant of Massachusetts. That belief gave their work a grave seriousness. They were not merely settling local complaints. They thought they were uncovering a hidden assault on the colony's spiritual life. This helps explain the urgency and confidence that marked the proceedings. Fear can feel like duty when leaders believe hesitation may allow danger to grow. The tragedy is that sincere conviction can still lead to terrible error. Salem's magistrates operated inside assumptions that made the accusations seem plausible and the risks seem enormous. Their responsibility was to judge carefully, yet their worldview pressed them toward action. The story reminds us that authority is most dangerous when it feels certain it is protecting everyone. Cotton. Mother urged caution while still believing witches could exist. Cotton Mather is often remembered as a symbol of the Salem era, but his position was more complicated than simple enthusiasm for the trials. He believed in witchcraft because that belief fit the theology and learning of his time. Yet he also warned against relying too heavily on spectral evidence. This tension makes him a fascinating figure. He accepted the reality of invisible evil while worrying that the legal process could be deceived. In other words, he did not reject the fear at the center of the crisis. He questioned how that fear should be proven. That distinction mattered, but perhaps not enough to stop the momentum. Mather's role shows how difficult reform can be when people share the same basic assumptions as the system they criticize. He wanted caution within belief, not disbelief itself. Salem needed exactly that caution, but fear was already moving faster than restraint. Increase Mather warned that better evidence was urgently needed. Increase Mather offered one of the most important criticisms of the trials when he argued that it would be better for suspected witches to escape than for innocent people to be condemned. That statement cut to the heart of the crisis. It did not require abandoning belief in witchcraft altogether. It insisted that justice must place proof above panic. His warning mattered because he was a respected minister, not an outsider mocking Puritan religion. He spoke from inside the culture that had produced the trials, which gave his criticism real force. By questioning the reliability of spectral evidence, he helped shift the colony toward doubt. His intervention reminds us that Salem was never a story of everyone thinking the same way. Even within the world of 17th century faith, people argued about evidence, fairness, and risk. Increase Mather's caution became part of the turning tide that weakened the court's confidence. Governor William Phips eventually stepped in to halt the trials. William Phips returned to Massachusetts during a period of upheaval and found the witchcraft proceedings already in motion. As governor, he faced a colony under pressure from war, political change, and public fear. At first, he allowed the special court to operate, but the growing controversy became impossible to ignore. Doubts about evidence increased. Accusations reached wider circles. Influential voices began warning that the process was unsafe. Phips eventually stopped the existing court and later restricted the kinds of evidence that could be used. This decision did not erase the suffering already caused, but it changed the direction of events. The machinery of accusation lost official momentum. His action shows how much depended on authority. Panic may spread through households and meeting rooms, but courts require permission to continue. When that permission was withdrawn, Salem's crisis began moving toward its end. The Court of Oyer and Terminer was created for Salem. A special court was established because the accusations had grown too serious for ordinary handling. Its creation gave the crisis an official structure and a sense of legal purpose. Without such a court, accusations might have remained a series of examinations and imprisonments while the colony waited for regular judicial action. With it, cases could move toward verdicts more quickly. That speed mattered, and not always in a good way. A special court can make a community feel that extraordinary danger requires extraordinary response. It can also concentrate authority at the very moment when caution is most needed. The Salem court gathered judges, heard testimony, and made decisions that would later be deeply questioned. Its existence reminds us that institutions do not simply respond to fear. They can shape fear, accelerate it, and give it procedure. The creation of this court turned local alarm into a formal legal crisis. Oyer and Terminer meant hearing and deciding in legal French. The court's name came from an older legal tradition, and it sounds almost mysterious to modern ears. The phrase referred to the authority to hear cases and determine them. Its French roots reached back through English law, carrying the memory of medieval courts into colonial Massachusetts. That detail matters because Salem was not improvising entirely from scratch. The colony drew on inherited legal language, even as it faced a crisis shaped by local belief and fear. The name gave the proceedings an air of formal legitimacy. It suggested order, procedure, and recognized authority. Yet impressive legal words could not guarantee wise judgment. That contrast is one of Salem's most striking features. A court with a grand inherited title could still struggle with evidence that was unstable and untestable. The old language of law surrounded a very human failure to separate certainty from proof. Judge William Stoughton pushed the court toward harsh certainty. William Stoughton served as the chief judge of the special court, and his influence helped define its direction. He was educated, experienced, and deeply committed to the moral seriousness of the proceedings. But his certainty made him less receptive to doubt. When questions arose about spectral evidence and the fairness of the process, Stoughton did not become a leading voice for restraint. He pressed forward with confidence. That confidence is what makes him such a revealing figure. Salem's danger did not come only from confusion. It also came from officials who believed they understood the threat clearly. Stoughton's later frustration with the slowing of prosecutions suggests how strongly he remained attached to the court's mission. His role helps us see that history often turns on temperament as well as law. A more cautious judge might have changed the pace. A more doubtful one might have changed everything. Some jurors later admitted they had made terrible mistakes. After the crisis ended, regret began to surface in public and private ways. Some jurors acknowledged that they had been mistaken and asked for forgiveness. Their remorse is one of the most human parts of Salem's aftermath. These were not distant officials alone. They were local men who had participated in decisions that could not be undone. Their apologies suggest the emotional burden carried by those who later believed they had helped condemn innocent neighbors. This also shows that Salem's meaning changed very quickly for some participants. What had felt necessary under pressure later appeared grievously wrong. That shift is important. It reveals the difference between being swept into a moment and looking back after fear has cooled. The juror's regret does not repair the damage, but it gives the story a moral depth. Salem was not only a crisis of accusation, it became a crisis of conscience. The colony used English law inside a New England crisis. Massachusetts was a Puritan colony, but its legal world was not separate from England. Colonial courts drew on English statutes, procedures, and assumptions about crime. Witchcraft itself had long been recognized in English law, which gave the Salem proceedings a framework beyond local panic. Yet the setting transformed that framework. New England's religious culture, village tensions, frontier fears, and small community networks gave the law a particular intensity. This blend is one reason Salem is so historically rich. It was not simply an old-world idea copied into America. It was English legal inheritance meeting colonial pressure. The result was a system that looked formal on paper, but operated inside a charged social world. Law did not float above culture. It carried culture into judgment. Salem reminds us that legal rules are only as careful as the people interpreting them and the assumptions they bring into the room. Salem's records survive with unusually vivid courtroom detail. One reason Salem remains so present in modern memory is that the paper trail is remarkably rich. Examinations, depositions, petitions, warrants, and later reflections allow historians to reconstruct the crisis with unusual closeness. We can see not only final outcomes, but the language people used while fear was unfolding. The documents preserve questions, accusations, denials, observations, and moments of confusion. They make the crisis feel immediate because they bring us near the voices of ordinary colonists. Many events from the same century survive only in fragments. Salem left a dense archive. That archive has allowed generations to revisit the trials from new angles. Scholars have studied gender, property, religion, law, trauma, and memory through these surviving pages. The records do not answer every question, and they must be read carefully. Still, they are extraordinary windows into a society trying to explain what frightened it. The written testimonies preserve voices from frightened ordinary people. Most people in 17th century villages did not expect their words to be studied centuries later. They lived local lives, spoke in familiar rooms, and worried about immediate needs. Yet Salem's testimonies pulled their voices into the historical record. A neighbor's complaint, a servant's memory, a farmer's observation, or a family member's plea could be written down by a clerk and preserved. That is part of what makes the documents so compelling. They do not only record officials and ministers. They capture people who might otherwise have vanished into silence. Through them, we hear fear taking shape in everyday language. We also hear confusion, anger, loyalty, and desperation. The testimonies are not simple mirrors of truth. They were shaped by pressure and by the expectations of the court. Even so, they remain precious because they reveal how ordinary people tried to make sense of an extraordinary crisis. Spelling in the records often changed from line to line. Reading Salem's documents can feel like entering a world before spelling settled into modern rules. A person's name might appear in more than one form. A common word might look strange to present-day eyes. Clerks wrote quickly, and spelling often followed sound, habit, or personal preference. This detail may seem small, but it brings the archive alive. It reminds us that these records were not polished history books. They were working documents made by human hands under pressure. The variation also creates challenges for historians. Searching for a name may require several spellings. Matching references across documents can take careful attention. Yet the irregular spelling has its own charm and importance. It preserves the texture of a society where literacy existed without modern standardization. The words may look unsettled, but they carried enormous consequences. In Salem, even a name written imperfectly could become part of a life-changing record. Accused people sometimes signed with marks instead of names. Not everyone involved in the Salem crisis could write fluently. Some people signed documents with a mark, often a simple shape made in place of a full signature. That mark could stand for consent, acknowledgement, or presence in a legal process that used written records heavily. The detail is quietly powerful. It shows the uneven world of literacy in colonial New England. Ministers, magistrates, and clerks moved easily through written language, while many ordinary people depended on others to record their words. This imbalance mattered. A person might speak in fear, confusion, or exhaustion, and then see that speech transformed into official text by someone else's hand. The mark at the bottom could carry legal weight, even if the signer could not fully command the written form. Salem's paper record therefore contains both voices and silences. It shows us who spoke, who wrote, and who had to trust the writing. Court clerks captured panic in careful ink and paper. The crisis feels emotional and chaotic, yet much of what we know comes from disciplined writing. Clerks sat with pen, ink, and paper while people made claims that could alter lives. They recorded statements, copied warrants, shaped depositions, and preserved the machinery of the court. This contrast is striking. Panic entered the archive through orderly lines. Fear became sentences. Spoken distress became official memory. The clerks were not neutral machines, because choices of wording and summary always matter. Still, their work gave Salem an afterlife. Without those papers, the crisis might be remembered mostly through legend. Instead, historians can trace how accusations moved, how officials responded, and how communities described the invisible. The careful handwriting does not soften the story. It makes it more intimate. We can almost see the moment when a frightened voice became a document, and a document became history. The Putnam family appeared repeatedly throughout the Salem records. Few family names appear as often in the surviving Salem documents. The Putnams were influential villagers with deep local roots, wide kinship ties, and strong connections to the faction that supported Reverend Parris. Their household was not a single voice. It was a network. Parents, children, relatives, and associates all appear in different ways during the crisis, which gave their concerns unusual reach. When someone from such a family spoke, the words moved through a community already shaped by alliances and rivalries. The Putnams also lived in a part of the village where disputes over identity and authority felt especially sharp. That made their role historically important. They were not simply bystanders who happened to witness strange events. They stood near the center of the village's social structure. Through them, we can see how family influence worked in colonial life. A household could become a channel through which fear gained direction, momentum, and public force. Ann Putnam Jr. became one of the most prominent accusers. A 12-year-old girl became one of the most powerful voices in the Salem crisis. Her accusations appeared again and again, and her reported afflictions shaped many examinations. In a society where children usually held little formal authority, this was extraordinary. Adults listened because they believed her suffering revealed hidden truth. Her words could bring respected people before magistrates, and her reactions in public rooms could affect how others interpreted an accused person's behavior. Yet she was still a child, living under adult supervision, religious pressure, and family expectations. That makes her role both fascinating and deeply complicated. She was not simply a symbol of power, and she was not simply a powerless figure. She occupied a strange position between the two. Through her, Salem shows how a frightened community can place enormous weight on a young voice, then build official action around what that voice seems to reveal. Years later, Ann Putnam publicly apologized for her role. More than a decade after the trials, one of Salem's central accusers stood before the church and expressed sorrow for her part in the crisis. Her statement is among the most remarkable documents from the aftermath. She did not explain everything away as childish confusion, nor did she claim full understanding of what had happened. Instead, she framed her actions as a grievous error and asked forgiveness. This moment matters because Salem did not end cleanly when the court stopped. Its consequences lived inside families, churches, and personal conscience. For Ann Putnam, memory became something that required public response. Her apology also shows how the community slowly changed its view of the events. What had once been treated as necessary action later appeared as a failure that needed repentance. The statement remains powerful because it gives the story a human afterlife. The crisis continued not in court, but in the burden of remembrance. Rebecca. Nurse was widely respected before suspicion reached her door. Rebecca Nurse's accusation shocked many because she had the kind of reputation that should have offered protection. She was elderly, known in the community, and connected to a family with standing. Her life did not fit the easier stereotypes that suspicion often followed. That made her case especially unsettling. If someone regarded as pious and respectable could be accused, then no reputation was entirely safe. Supporters rallied around her, and petitions spoke to the respect she had earned. Yet, in the charged atmosphere of the trials, character witnesses could struggle against the dramatic power of affliction claims. Her story reveals how fear can break through ordinary measures of trust. The village had ways to judge a life. Long conduct, church standing, and neighborly memory all mattered. But during the crisis, those safeguards weakened. Rebecca. Nurse became a symbol of how quickly a community's confidence in goodness could be overturned. Martha Corey's church membership made her accusation especially shocking. Martha Corey belonged to the church, which meant she had passed through a serious process of spiritual examination. In Puritan communities, membership suggested visible godliness and moral standing. Her accusation therefore disturbed the expected order of things. It implied that someone recognized within the church could still be suspected of secret corruption. This struck at the confidence of the congregation itself. If membership could not reassure people, then what could? Martha had also questioned the accusations, and skepticism could seem dangerous in a frightened community. Her doubts did not protect her. They may have made her more noticeable. The case shows how Salem's fear turned even religious belonging into uncertain ground. A church covenant was supposed to mark a gathered body of the faithful. During the crisis, that meaning was shaken. Martha Corey's examination revealed a painful possibility for her neighbors. The signs they trusted most might not be enough to defend anyone. Charles Corey refused to enter a plea before the court. Charles Corey's refusal created one of the strangest legal moments in the Salem story. By declining to plead either guilty or not guilty, he placed the court in a difficult position under English legal tradition. Without a plea, a trial could not proceed in the ordinary way. His motives have been debated, but one likely reason involved protecting his estate from legal forfeiture. This makes the moment more than an act of stubbornness. It becomes a window into property, family strategy, and law under extreme pressure. Corey was an elderly man with a long and complicated reputation, and his silence became louder than many spoken defenses. In a crisis filled with accusations and testimony, he chose refusal. That choice turned procedure itself into a battleground. Salem's records often show people trying to explain themselves. Corey's case shows something different. Sometimes the most powerful response to a system is not argument, but silence. Mary Eastie's calm petition became one of Salem's memorable documents. Mary Eastie left behind words that still carry remarkable dignity. Her petition did not simply beg for her own safety. It asked officials to consider the danger faced by others and to examine the evidence more carefully. That wider concern makes the document extraordinary. Written from inside a crisis that had already reached her personally, it still looked beyond the self. The tone was measured rather than furious, which may be why it remained so affecting. It shows a mind trying to reason with authority when reason seemed to be losing ground. Petitions were an important part of colonial life, giving ordinary people a formal way to address power. Eastie used that form with unusual moral clarity. Her words remind us that the accused were not voiceless figures moving through someone else's story. They understood what was happening around them. They argued, pleaded, warned, and sometimes saw the danger more clearly than the court. Elizabeth Proctor's pregnancy temporarily delayed her sentence. Elizabeth Proctor's case reveals how law, family, and the body intersected in colonial justice. After conviction, her pregnancy meant that punishment was postponed. This was not an act of broad mercy toward her as an individual. It reflected a legal concern for the unborn child, whose life was treated as separate from the mother's sentence. That distinction offers a striking glimpse into 17th century legal thinking. Elizabeth's situation also changed the emotional world of her family. Her husband faced proceedings at the same time, and their household became one of the most remembered in the Salem story. The delay ultimately mattered because the crisis shifted before her sentence was carried out. She survived, though survival did not mean a simple return to ordinary life. Her case shows how timing could alter destiny during the trials. A private fact of motherhood became a legal pause, and that pause became the difference between life and loss. John Proctor challenged the court with unusual force and clarity. John Proctor did not enter the Salem story as a quiet figure. He criticized the proceedings and spoke against the credibility of the accusations. That boldness made him memorable, but it also made him vulnerable. In a frightened community, challenging the process could be interpreted as more than disagreement. It could be treated as resistance to the discovery of hidden danger. Proctor understood that the court's methods threatened not only individuals, but the whole idea of justice. His words and petitions reveal a man trying to expose the machinery that was closing around him. He was also a tavern keeper, a landholder, and a husband caught in a crisis that reached directly into his family. His case later became one of the best known because it dramatizes a central conflict. What happens when a person refuses to accept a system that has already decided fear is evidence? Salem remembered that question through him. Bridget Bishop was known for standing apart from expectation. Bridget Bishop had a reputation that made her easy for some neighbors to judge. She had been involved in earlier disputes, and people remembered her clothing, household conflicts, and independent manner. In a strict society, standing apart could become dangerous. Behavior that might seem merely colorful or assertive in another setting could be recast as suspicious when fear took hold. Bishop's case is often remembered because she was the first person executed during the Salem trials, but her significance is also social. She shows how communities police difference before they ever enter a courtroom. People had stories about her long before the formal accusation. Those stories gave the court a background that made suspicion sound familiar. Her life reminds us that reputation is never neutral during a panic. The traits that make a person visible can become the very traits that make others believe the worst. Salem turned difference into a warning sign. George Burroughs had once served as a minister in Salem Village. George Burroughs's accusation startled people because he had held religious authority. He was not an unknown outsider with no connection to the village. He had served there as a minister years earlier, during a period already marked by tension. His return to the story as an accused man carried a deep irony. A person once expected to teach and guide the community was now presented as a hidden enemy within it. Burroughs also lived in Maine before the trials, which connected him to frontier experiences and older grievances. His case shows how memory can travel across years and places. Conflicts from a former ministry did not simply disappear. They could be revived, reshaped, and folded into new fear. The accusation against him expanded the crisis beyond simple stereotypes. It suggested that even someone trained in scripture and public religion could be imagined as dangerous. That possibility made Salem's anxiety feel almost limitless. Burroughs's strength was strangely used as evidence against him. One of the more curious claims surrounding George Burroughs involved his physical strength. Witnesses described feats that seemed, to them, beyond ordinary ability. In a different context, strength might have been admired or treated as a natural gift. During the trials, it could become suspicious. This reveals how fear changes interpretation. The same fact can carry different meanings depending on the story people are already telling. If the court believed a person might have supernatural assistance, unusual strength seemed to fit the pattern. The claim did not need to prove the case by itself. It added texture to an accusation that officials were already willing to hear. Burroughs's case reminds us that Salem's evidence often worked by accumulation. A memory, a rumor, a physical trait, and a spiritual fear could be placed together until they appeared to form a whole. What looked impressive in life became ominous in court. Some accused people were connected to earlier disputes in Maine. The Salem crisis did not belong only to village quarrels. Some threads reached northward into Maine, where English settlements had faced conflict, displacement, and fear. Several figures connected to the trials had lived, worked, or served in those frontier areas. Their histories carried memories of danger that Salem villagers may have only partly understood. Maine was not a distant abstraction to New Englanders. It was a place of vulnerability, loss, and contested survival. People who moved between those worlds brought stories with them. Old disputes from frontier communities could follow a person into Essex County. In the pressure of 1692, those older connections might take on new significance. This wider geography makes Salem more complex. It was not sealed inside one village's boundaries. It was linked to colonial expansion, warfare, migration, and trauma. The trials gathered many anxieties into one legal drama, including fears born far from Salem's meeting house. Frontier warfare made the colony feel surrounded by danger. War along the northern frontier shaped the emotional climate of Massachusetts. Reports of attacks, burned settlements, and captives circulated through the colony. These stories created a sense that danger could arrive without warning. For Puritan settlers, warfare also carried spiritual meaning. Many believed public calamities reflected divine displeasure or satanic assault. That interpretation made external conflict feel connected to internal weakness. If enemies threatened from beyond the settled towns, hidden enemies might also threaten from within. This does not mean war caused the Salem trials in a simple way. History is rarely that neat. But frontier violence helped create a world of heightened fear. People were alert, grieving, and searching for explanations. A society under pressure often becomes more willing to believe that ordinary safety has been breached. Salem's crisis unfolded at a moment when the colony already felt exposed. That sense of exposure made invisible danger seem more believable. Refugees from attacks brought fresh trauma into Essex County. People displaced by frontier violence carried more than belongings when they arrived in safer communities. They carried memories. Some had seen homes destroyed. Some had lost relatives. Others had endured flight, uncertainty, and fear that did not vanish after reaching shelter. Essex County absorbed stories from these borderlands, and those stories helped shape the emotional background of 1692. Trauma can change how people hear new threats. It can make danger feel near, even when the immediate setting appears calm. In Salem, some accusers and witnesses had connections to frontier suffering. Their experiences did not need to be discussed at every examination to matter. They lived beneath the surface of the crisis. When strange afflictions appeared, the colony already knew what helplessness could feel like. This connection adds depth to the story. Salem was not only about belief. It was also about a society trying to process fear after real violence. News traveled through taverns, meeting houses, households, and busy roads. Information in colonial New England moved through spoken networks as much as written ones. A traveler could carry a rumor from one town to another. A sermon could frame events for an entire congregation. A tavern conversation could sharpen a suspicion before it ever reached a magistrate. Roads connected farms, courts, ports, and neighboring settlements, allowing fear to travel with surprising speed. This matters because Salem was not a world of instant communication, yet it was far from silent. People talked constantly. They repeated what they had heard, adjusted it, and passed it along. The shape of the crisis depended on these human channels. News did not arrive as neutral information. It came wrapped in emotion, reputation, and interpretation. By the time a story reached a new listener, it might already feel like part of a larger pattern. Salem reminds us that every age has its own network, and every network can carry panic. The crisis spread beyond Salem into Andover and nearby towns. The name Salem dominates memory, but the accusations moved outward. Andover became especially important, and other communities also felt the pull of suspicion. This spread shows that the crisis had become larger than the original household disturbance and village conflict. Once officials accepted the possibility of a hidden network, new places could be drawn into the search. The logic of the trials encouraged expansion. If one confession named others, and those people named still more, the map of fear could grow quickly. Andover's involvement is especially revealing because it shows how procedures developed in one setting could be carried into another. People outside Salem watched, heard, and then became participants. The crisis became regional through movement, rumor, and official action. This wider spread challenges the simple idea of Salem as one isolated community losing control. It was a colonial event with ripples that reached into many homes. Andover produced one of the largest clusters of accusations. Andover's role became striking when large numbers of people were drawn into examination and confession. The town's experience demonstrates how a search for hidden guilt can multiply once it is treated as successful. In Andover, methods used to identify suspects created a chain reaction. Fear moved through families and neighbors with remarkable force. Some people confessed, sometimes under intense pressure, and those confessions could implicate others. The result was a widening circle that threatened to overwhelm ordinary trust. Andover is important because it shows the machinery of accusation working almost too well. When authorities believe a method reveals secret danger, every new name appears to prove that the method is necessary. That is a powerful trap. The more people are accused, the more real the threat seems. Andover's cluster helps us see Salem not only as a tragedy of belief, but as a system that learned how to expand itself. Some Andover residents later challenged the methods used against them. After the panic cooled, people in Andover pushed back against what had happened there. Some rejected their confessions and explained that pressure, fear, and the hope of safety had shaped their words. This is one of the clearest windows into how the crisis operated from the inside. A confession that looked convincing to officials could later be described as the product of unbearable circumstances. Those later challenges mattered because they weakened the moral authority of the proceedings. They showed that the court had not simply uncovered truth. It had helped create statements people did not freely own. Andover's resistance also reminds us that ordinary columnists were not helplessly silent once the moment passed. They petitioned, explained, and tried to restore their names. The aftermath became a struggle over memory, as well as justice. People wanted the record corrected, because the written word could outlive the fear that produced it. Families sometimes accused neighbors they had known for decades. The most unsettling thing about Salem is how intimate many accusations were. These were not always strangers pointing at strangers. In some cases, people named those whose habits, households, and histories were already familiar. That closeness makes the crisis more painful and more revealing. Long acquaintance should create understanding, but under pressure, it can also store grievances. A neighbor's odd remark from years before might be remembered with new suspicion. A dispute over an animal, a fence, or a debt might gain a darker meaning. Familiarity did not prevent fear. It gave fear material to work with. The accused person was not an unknown shadow. They were someone seen at worship, on roads, or in nearby fields. Salem shows how community knowledge can be transformed. The very details that make people known to one another can become evidence in a frightened mind. Trust is built slowly, but panic can rewrite it very quickly. Children's words carried astonishing power during the examinations. In ordinary village life, children were expected to obey, learn, and submit to adult authority. During the Salem examinations, that hierarchy became strangely altered. Young accusers spoke words that magistrates recorded and adults treated with grave seriousness. Their reported suffering gave their statements a force that age alone would never have provided. This is one reason the crisis feels so unusual. The court did not simply listen to children as children. It listened as though they were witnesses to a hidden world. That belief gave their voices extraordinary reach. Yet the children themselves lived within adult interpretations, family pressures, religious teaching, and public expectation. Their words were powerful, but the meaning of those words was shaped by grown people around them. Salem therefore raises difficult questions about childhood, authority, and responsibility. It shows how a society can elevate young voices when they seem to confirm what adults already fear. Adults often interpreted childish fear through strict religious expectations. A frightened child in Puritan New England was not understood in the same way a modern psychologist might understand distress. Adults looked through the lens of sin, providence, temptation, and spiritual danger. A strange symptom could become a sign. A nightmare could become a warning. A child's panic could be folded into a larger religious story before anyone considered causes that would sound familiar today. This does not mean adults lacked compassion. Many were genuinely alarmed and wanted to protect the young. But their interpretive world pushed them towards supernatural explanations when ordinary ones seemed inadequate. In Salem, children's behavior became meaningful because adults supplied the framework. They asked questions, suggested possibilities, and treated certain answers as important. The crisis grew at the meeting point between young distress and adult belief. That meeting point is historically fascinating because it shows how culture teaches people what fear is supposed to mean. Puritan children were taught that unseen danger was real. From an early age, children in Puritan households learned that life had spiritual stakes. Sermons, catechisms, family prayers, and moral instruction taught them that the invisible world mattered. The devil was not a storybook figure. Temptation was not a mild idea. Children were encouraged to examine their hearts and understand that danger could reach the soul. This training shaped imagination. A child who felt fear did not experience it in a neutral universe. They lived in a world where unseen powers were discussed seriously by trusted adults. That background helps explain why the language of Salem could make sense even to the young. They had already been given concepts that connected distress to spiritual conflict. The crisis did not invent those ideas. It activated them under extreme pressure. Understanding this childhood education helps us hear the accusations differently. They emerged from a culture where invisible danger was part of daily learning. The afflicted girls performed symptoms that magistrates studied intensely. During examinations, the afflicted girls' bodies became a focus of official attention. Magistrates watched their movements, listened to their cries, and asked questions meant to connect suffering to the accused. The result was a strange form of public investigation, where physical behavior seemed to carry meaning. A fit could interrupt testimony. A gesture could redirect suspicion. A sudden calm could be treated as important. This placed enormous interpretive weight on symptoms that no one fully understood. Today, historians have suggested many possible explanations, including stress, social pressure, illness, and learned behavior. The exact mixture may never be known. What is clear is that the court treated the performances as evidence rather than simply distress. That choice shaped the crisis. Once the body was believed to reveal invisible harm, each episode became part of the legal drama. Salem turned suffering into testimony, and testimony into action. Modern explanations include stress, illness, social tension, and belief. Historians and researchers have long tried to understand what produced the afflicted behavior in Salem. No single explanation has persuaded everyone, and that uncertainty is part of the subject's enduring power. Psychological stress may have played a role. Physical illness is possible in some cases. Social tension clearly shaped the way accusations moved. Religious belief gave people a language for interpreting what they saw. None of these factors needs to exclude the others. Human events often arise from many pressures converging at once. Salem is especially difficult because we cannot interview the participants or observe the symptoms directly. We have documents filtered through 17th century observers. That makes careful interpretation essential. The most responsible explanations avoid turning the crisis into a simple trick or a simple disease. Salem was a human event shaped by bodies, minds, households, courts, and culture. Its mystery survives because all those layers mattered. Ergot poisoning is famous, but historians remain deeply skeptical. One popular theory suggests that contaminated rye may have caused hallucinations or convulsions in Salem. The idea is memorable because ergot can affect the body in dramatic ways, and rye was part of the colonial diet. It offers a neat explanation, which is one reason it became famous. But historians have found major problems with it. The symptoms in the records do not match cleanly. The timing and geography of the accusations do not fit as well as the theory requires. It also cannot explain why particular people were accused, why the crisis followed social lines, or why legal decisions unfolded as they did. Salem was not merely a medical puzzle. It was a community crisis. Ergot may sound compelling because it reduces the story to a hidden natural cause, but the evidence is weak. The theory remains a useful caution. A fascinating explanation is not always the most convincing one. Salem was not the only witchcraft panic in New England. Before 1692, New England had already seen witchcraft accusations and trials. The fear did not appear suddenly in Salem without precedent. Earlier cases in places such as Connecticut and Massachusetts had established patterns of suspicion, testimony, and punishment. These episodes were smaller, but they showed that the legal and religious imagination was already prepared to treat witchcraft as real. Salem became famous because of its scale, records, and later cultural power. It was not the beginning of colonial witchcraft belief. Understanding that wider background helps put Salem in perspective. People in 1692 did not think they were inventing a new kind of crime. They believed they were confronting a danger known from scripture, law, and past experience. That sense of precedent made action easier. If earlier communities had prosecuted witchcraft, Salem's authorities could see themselves as continuing a recognized duty rather than entering unknown territory. Earlier cases had already shaped colonial fears about witchcraft. The memory of previous accusations mattered because stories travel. A household might hear about a woman tried years earlier. A minister might mention examples in warning. A magistrate might know that courts had dealt with such charges before. These earlier cases created expectations about what witchcraft might look like. They included patterns of neighborhood conflict, unexplained illness, suspicious words, and testimony about harmful acts. When Salem's crisis began, people had a set of familiar ideas ready to use. This is how cultural memory works. It supplies templates for interpreting new events. The danger is that templates can make people see what they expect to see. Earlier cases did not cause Salem directly, but they made the accusations legible. They taught colonists which questions to ask and which kinds of answers sounded plausible. Salem was therefore both exceptional and inherited. It was a dramatic eruption from a fear that had already been rehearsed. Europe's witch trials formed the background to Salem's thinking. Across early modern Europe, witch trials had unfolded for centuries before Salem. Books, sermons, legal traditions, and educated discussion carried ideas about witchcraft across the Atlantic. New England colonists were not cut off from that intellectual world. They inherited beliefs about the devil, covenants, confessions, and invisible harm from a much larger Christian culture. The Salem trials were smaller than the vast panics that had affected parts of Europe, yet they drew from the same reservoir of fear. This wider background matters because it prevents us from treating Salem as a strange American invention. It was part of the transatlantic history of belief and law. At the same time, Salem had its own local shape, formed by village conflict and colonial insecurity. The old European framework gave people a way to imagine the crime. New England's circumstances gave that imagination a particular place to ignite. New England's trials were smaller than many European persecutions. Salem looms large in American memory, but on the scale of European witch hunting, it was relatively limited. Some regions of Europe saw far greater numbers of accusations and executions over longer periods. That comparison does not make Salem less tragic. It makes its fame more interesting. Salem became iconic not because it was the largest witch trial in history, but because it was intensely documented, morally reconsidered, and later woven into American culture. The scale also reveals something about New England. Its authorities did prosecute witchcraft, but the region did not experience the same sustained waves seen elsewhere. By 1692, skepticism about certain kinds of evidence was already strong enough among some ministers to help bring the crisis under question. Salem sits at a historical crossroads. It was late enough to be challenged, but not too late to happen. Bad timing helped turn a local disaster into a lasting warning. Salem became famous partly because its records survived so well. Many historical events fade because the evidence is thin, but Salem left behind an unusually rich paper trail. That archive gave later generations something powerful to return to. Instead of relying only on legend, historians could read examinations, warrants, depositions, petitions, and later statements of regret. The surviving documents make the crisis feel close because they preserve the language of fear as it was being spoken. You can follow how an accusation moved from a household concern into an official process. You can see how names entered the record, how questions were framed, and how people tried to defend themselves. This is one reason Salem became more famous than many other witchcraft cases. It could be studied almost scene by scene. The records turned a local tragedy into a historical mirror. They allowed each century to ask new questions of the same pages and to find new warnings inside them. The crisis lasted only months, but its memory endured for centuries. The main events unfolded with startling speed. In less than a year, a frightened community moved from the first strange symptoms to examinations, trials, and eventual collapse of confidence in the process. That short time span is part of what makes the story so gripping. A society that had taken decades to build trust could see that trust shaken in a single season. Yet the memory did not fade with the end of the court. Families carried the consequences. Churches wrestled with responsibility. The colony tried to repair names through later action. Then writers, teachers, and politicians kept returning to the story because it spoke to recurring human dangers. Salem became larger in memory than it had been in time. The briefness of the crisis makes it even more haunting. It shows how quickly fear can act and how slowly a community may recover from what fear has done. Public fasting and prayer were used to calm the colony. In Puritan Massachusetts, public trouble called for public spiritual response. Leaders could appoint days of fasting, prayer, and repentance when the community believed it faced danger or divine displeasure. During and after the Salem crisis, this practice mattered because people did not see the events as merely legal confusion. They saw them as a sign that the colony needed to examine itself before God. Fasting was not simply going without food. It was a deliberate act of humility. Prayer created a shared language for fear, regret, and the hope of restoration. This helps us understand the emotional world of the time. People did not separate civic life from spiritual meaning in the way many modern societies do. When the trials shook confidence, the answer was not only procedural reform. It was also collective repentance. The colony tried to steady itself by turning inward, asking what had gone wrong in its own soul. Ministers eventually questioned whether the court had trusted false signs. As the trials continued, some religious leaders grew more uneasy about the kind of evidence being accepted. The central issue was not whether evil existed. Most still believed it did. The harder question was how anyone could prove that a particular person had joined it. Spectral claims, bodily reactions, and strange reports seemed dangerous because they might be misleading. If the devil could deceive, then perhaps he could also impersonate the innocent. That possibility cut directly against the court's confidence. Ministers who raised concerns helped shift the colony from certainty toward doubt. Their hesitation mattered because they spoke from inside the same religious culture as the accusers. They were not dismissing the spiritual world. They were warning that justice required firmer ground. This growing caution helped unravel the authority of the trials. Salem's ending began when respected voices asked whether fear itself had been mistaken for evidence. The end came when elite families faced accusations too. Fear often spread fastest among the vulnerable, but Salem's panic began to lose support when suspicion climbed higher into society. As accusations reached people with powerful connections, the danger felt different to colonial leaders. Claims that had once seemed credible against marginal or controversial figures became harder to accept when they touched respected households. This exposed a troubling truth about social power. Doubt often arrives more quickly when authority recognizes itself as vulnerable. The widening of accusations made the process seem less like discovery and more like a force that could consume anyone. Once prominent names were no longer safely outside the circle, officials had stronger reasons to question the machinery they had allowed to run. This does not mean concern for the less powerful was absent. It means social status shaped the pace of skepticism. Salem's collapse shows that a system built on unstable evidence eventually threatens even those who first trusted it. Governor Phipps's own wife was rumored about during the panic. One of the most striking signs of the crisis reaching its limit was the reported suspicion touching the governor's household. Whether rumor, threat, or political pressure, the idea that the governor's wife could be drawn into the atmosphere of accusation showed how dangerously wide the panic had grown. No one seemed completely beyond reach. For a leader responsible for public order, this was more than a personal alarm. It revealed that the process no longer had a clear boundary. If accusations could climb to the colony's highest social level, then the court's methods might destabilize the very government they were supposed to protect. This helps explain why official confidence weakened. The logic of the trials had become too expansive. It could not easily stop itself. The rumor surrounding Lady Mary Phipps stands as a moment when authority may have recognized that fear, once licensed, does not politely remain below stairs. The legal system changed after spectral evidence lost credibility. The collapse of trust in spectral evidence marked a turning point. Courts could still hear witchcraft cases, but without that kind of testimony, the prosecutions became far harder to sustain. Invisible claims no longer carried the same official force. This mattered because the entire structure of accusation had depended on experiences that could not be independently tested. Once judges and leaders demanded more reliable proof, the cases weakened. The change was not a modern legal revolution in one neat step, but it was a meaningful retreat from the most dangerous assumptions of the trials. Salem helped demonstrate that evidence must be capable of challenge. A person accused of a grave crime needs some way to answer the charge. When the law accepts what cannot be tested, defense becomes almost impossible. The rejection of spectral evidence therefore became one of Salem's most important legacies. It turned doubt into a safeguard. Later courts released many prisoners who had waited in fear. When the special court ended and evidentiary standards shifted, many people still remained in jail. Some had been accused months earlier. Some had families struggling outside. Some had waited without knowing whether their names would lead to trial, release, or ruin. Later proceedings did not continue the same momentum. Cases that might once have seemed dangerous began to fall apart. Prisoners were acquitted, discharged, or gradually freed as confidence in the accusations weakened. Their release reveals a quieter part of the aftermath. The end of a panic is not one dramatic moment for everyone. For many, it comes through paperwork, doors opening, and the first uncertain return home. Yet freedom did not restore everything. Reputations had been damaged. Property might be lost. Families had been frightened and separated. These releases show how quickly the legal atmosphere had changed and how many lives had been suspended while fear held authority. Families spent years trying to clear the names of relatives. The trials did not end when the court stopped meeting. For many families, the most important work came afterward. They petitioned the government, sought reversals, requested compensation, and tried to restore honor to names that had been stained by accusation. In a society where reputation mattered deeply, clearing a name was not symbolic only. It affected inheritance, memory, church standing, and the way descendants understood their own family story. These efforts often required patience because governments move slowly, especially when admitting past wrong. Some families waited many years before receiving legal recognition. Others carried grief without full repair. This long struggle is one of the reasons Salem feels so human. The accused were not isolated figures who disappeared from history. They belonged to networks of children, spouses, siblings, and grandchildren. Those networks remembered. They insisted that official records could be corrected and that truth still mattered after fear had passed. Massachusetts eventually offered compensation to some survivors and families. The colony's later compensation efforts were limited, but they were historically significant. Money could not undo imprisonment, damaged reputation, or the loss of loved ones. Still, compensation represented an official acknowledgement that something had gone badly wrong. Petitions from families helped push the government to consider the material consequences of the trials. Legal error had not remained inside the courtroom. It had affected estates, labor, household stability, and future security. Some families received payments for what they had endured or lost. These settlements remind us that injustice has practical consequences. It can drain resources, interrupt work, and leave survivors with burdens that last long after public attention moves elsewhere. The compensation process also shows how memory became administrative. Regret had to be translated into claims, amounts, and official acts. That translation was imperfect, but it mattered. It placed the colony's remorse into the public record. The colony declared a day of fasting for the tragedy. In 1697, Massachusetts held a day of fasting that became closely associated with public remorse for the trials. This was a major spiritual gesture. It invited the community to stop, reflect, and humble itself before God. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, famously stood in church while a statement of apology was read on his behalf. That moment has echoed through history because it shows a public official accepting responsibility in a deeply religious culture. The day was not only about one man's conscience. It marked a wider recognition that the colony had reason to mourn and repent. Fasting gave the community a form for grief that law alone could not provide. It allowed people to express sorrow without pretending that the past could be repaired quickly. Salem's aftermath was therefore both legal and spiritual. The colony had to reckon with what its own certainty had produced. Salem's apology came slowly through law, memory, and ritual. There was no single moment when everything was made right. The process unfolded across petitions, reversals, public statements, church actions, and commemorations. Some names were cleared earlier than others. Some families received recognition, while others waited far longer. Memory moved unevenly, shaped by politics, shame, and the changing needs of later generations. This slow apology is important because societies rarely repent all at once. They often acknowledge wrongdoing in fragments. A legal act may correct one part of the record. A memorial may address another. A public ceremony may give emotion a place to rest. Salem's long reckoning shows how difficult it is for communities to face their own failures honestly. The past does not simply release its hold because officials declare a crisis over. Repair requires repeated acts of attention. It requires names spoken again with care. It requires the humility to admit that the first judgment was wrong. The word witch hunt gained lasting power from Salem's story. Today, the phrase is used far beyond its original meaning. People use it to describe campaigns of accusation that seem driven by fear, politics, or public pressure, rather than solid evidence. Salem gave the phrase special force in American culture because the trials became the best-known example of suspicion overwhelming fairness. The expression works because it carries a whole warning inside it. It suggests that a community has begun searching for enemies in a way that makes defense difficult. Yet the phrase should be used carefully. The real Salem involved specific people, laws, beliefs, and consequences. Turning it into a casual insult can flatten the history. Still, its endurance proves how deeply the trials entered public language. Salem gave later generations a name for a recurring danger. When accusation becomes its own proof, the old story returns, asking whether justice is still awake. Arthur Miller used Salem to explore fear in modern politics. When Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible in the early 1950s, he was not only looking backward, he used Salem as a lens for his own era, when fear of communism shaped investigations, careers, and public reputations in the United States. The play transformed 17th century events into a drama about pressure, conscience, and the cost of refusing false confession. Miller did not reproduce the historical record exactly. He reshaped characters and relationships to serve the stage. But the emotional truth he pursued was powerful. He saw in Salem a pattern that could repeat whenever societies demand purity and punish doubt. That connection helped make the trials feel modern. Audiences could watch colonial villages and recognize their own world. The play became one reason Salem remained alive in public imagination. It showed that the past is not only behind us. Sometimes it becomes a language for naming the present. The Crucible made Salem familiar to audiences around the world. A stage play carried the Salem story far beyond historians, classrooms, and Massachusetts tourism. Through performance, the crisis became immediate. Viewers watched accusations gather force in real time. They saw how private motives could hide beneath public righteousness. They heard characters wrestle with confession, reputation, and conscience. Because theater happens in front of living people, the story gained a different kind of power. It was no longer only something read in documents. It became something felt in a room. School productions, professional performances, and film adaptations spread that version of Salem across countries and generations. For many people, the play became their first encounter with the trials. That influence is enormous. Even though the play is not the same as history, it shaped the emotional memory of Salem. It taught audiences to see the crisis as a warning about fear, authority, and the terrifying loneliness of telling the truth. Modern Salem transformed a painful history into public remembrance. The city known today as Salem carries a complicated legacy. It is a place of tourism, museums, shops, walking tours, historic sites, and seasonal crowds. Some visitors come for entertainment. Others come for reflection. Balancing those motives is not easy. A painful history can attract curiosity, but remembrance asks for seriousness. Modern Salem has had to manage both. The city's public identity is tied to witchcraft imagery, yet the real events involved accused people whose lives were profoundly altered. This tension makes Salem fascinating as a modern historical landscape. It shows how communities live with difficult pasts when those pasts become famous. The challenge is to welcome curiosity without turning suffering into a costume. At its best, public remembrance invites visitors to move beyond the legend and meet the human story. Modern Salem asks us to consider not only what happened, but how history should be carried. Memorial stones now honor the victims with quiet simplicity. The memorial in Salem uses plain stone forms and engraved names to create a space of reflection. Its power comes from restraint. There is no need for spectacle. The names themselves carry the weight. Visitors can walk among the stones and feel the difference between legend and human loss. Each inscription returns individuality to people who were once reduced to accusations. This matters because memorials do a kind of historical work that books cannot do in the same way. They give memory a physical place. They ask the body to slow down, to stand, to look, and to recognize. The simplicity is important. It resists the temptation to make the story dramatic for its own sake. Salem's victims had already been caught inside a public drama they did not choose. The memorial answers with stillness, order, and respect. It turns a famous episode back into a set of human names. Salem's museums balance tourism with the weight of real history. Museums in Salem face a delicate task. They must engage visitors who arrive with different expectations, from casual curiosity to serious historical interest. Some people know the trials through popular culture. Others come seeking genealogy, scholarship, or a deeper understanding of colonial life. The best museum interpretation has to meet curiosity without feeding distortion. It must explain belief systems, legal structures, social tensions, and personal stories in ways that remain accessible. This balance matters because Salem is easy to sensationalize. The word witchcraft can pull attention toward fantasy, while the actual history asks for care. Museums help bridge that gap. They can show documents, objects, maps, and reconstructed settings that ground the story in real time and place. They can also correct myths that have grown around the trials. In that sense, Salem's museums do more than preserve the past. They teach visitors how to approach a famous tragedy responsibly. The original village is now mostly modern Danvers, Massachusetts. Many people imagine the trials happening in the heart of today's Salem, but the village at the center of the early crisis is largely part of modern Danvers. This geographical detail changes how the story feels. The famous name Salem points us toward one city, while the village landscape reminds us of a different setting. The original community was inland, agricultural, and socially tangled in ways distinct from the port town. Modern roads and neighborhoods now cover much of that world, but traces remain through historic sites, markers, and local memory. Knowing this helps separate the tourist image from the 17th century reality. The crisis began in a village environment where farms, meeting house politics, and family networks shaped daily life. Danvers carries that quieter, more local inheritance. It reminds us that history often survives beneath changed names. A place can transform completely and still hold the outline of what happened there. Archaeology helped identify the likely site of Proctor's Ledge. For many years, people debated the exact location where the Salem executions took place. Tradition pointed broadly toward Gallows Hill, but the precise site remained uncertain. Careful research eventually brought historians and archaeologists to Proctor's Ledge. The work combined old documents, landscape study, maps, local tradition, and physical evidence. This process is fascinating because it shows how history can be rediscovered through patient investigation. A place remembered in general terms can become specific again. That specificity matters. Memorialization is different when people can stand near the likely ground where events occurred. It transforms abstract memory into geography. Proctor's Ledge also shows that even famous histories can contain unresolved questions. The past is not always fully visible, even when the story is well known. Sometimes it has to be located again, not through legend, but through the careful meeting of documents and earth. Gallows Hill was long remembered, but the exact site was uncertain. For generations, Gallows Hill occupied a powerful place in Salem memory. The name itself carried a heavy association, and many assumed it marked the place of execution. Yet memory can preserve a general truth while losing precise detail. Landscapes change. Roads shift. Buildings rise. Local stories simplify complicated geography. Over time, the exact site became blurred. This uncertainty is a reminder that even deeply famous events can become physically unclear. People may remember that something happened, while forgetting exactly where it happened. The search for the location was therefore not merely about maps. It was about historical responsibility. If a community is going to remember publicly, it should try to remember accurately. Gallows Hill's long association with the trials shows how place names can hold emotional power. The later tarification of the site shows why careful research matters. Memory needs feeling, but it also needs evidence. Proctor's Ledge became a place of reflection after careful research. Once researchers identified the likely site, the location was marked in a more intentional way. The memorial of Proctor's Ledge offers a focused place for remembrance, separate from the broad legend of Gallows Hill. This matters because accuracy gives respect a firmer foundation. Visitors can now approach the site with a clearer understanding of what it represents. The landscape itself is modest, which makes the history feel more real rather than less. It is not a dramatic cliff from a storybook. It is a specific place within a modern neighborhood, connected to real people and documented events. That ordinariness carries its own force. Salem's tragedy did not happen in a mythical realm. It happened in lived spaces that later generations continued to inhabit. Proctor's Ledge asks visitors to hold fame and humility together. The site became meaningful because research narrowed memory into place, and place invited reflection. The Salem Witch Trials Memorial opened 3 centuries after the crisis. The memorial opened in 1992, marking 300 years since the trials. That timing was important because anniversaries can make societies look again at what they have inherited. The memorial's design invites visitors to encounter the names individually rather than absorb the event as a vague tragedy. Stone benches bear inscriptions for those executed, and the surrounding space creates a boundary between everyday movement and remembrance. The opening also reflected a broader shift in how Salem presented its past. The city increasingly recognized the need to honor victims, not simply attract attention through legend. 3 centuries is a long time, yet the memorial showed that public acts of memory can still matter. They do not change the past, but they change how the living approach it. The delay itself is meaningful. It took generations for the story to receive a civic space shaped primarily by dignity. Descendants still trace family stories back to the accusations. For many families, Salem is not only a chapter in a history book. It is part of genealogy, identity, and inherited memory. Descendants of the accused, accusers, judges, ministers, and witnesses continue to study their connections to the trials. Some feel pride in an ancestor's courage. Others feel sorrow, discomfort, or responsibility. Genealogy makes the story intimate because it turns famous names back into relatives. It also shows how long the consequences of public events can last. A document written in 1692 might still matter to someone researching a family line today. These personal connections help keep Salem alive, but they can also complicate it. Families may inherit stories that blend fact with tradition. Careful research becomes a way of honoring the past without reshaping it into something easier. Descendants remind us that history does not belong only to museums. It lives in family questions passed quietly across generations. Some accused people were outsiders, but many were deeply local. It is tempting to imagine accusation falling mainly on strangers or social outcasts. Salem was more complicated. Some accused people were vulnerable, poor, or socially marginal, and that mattered. Others were woven deeply into the community through church, family, property, and reputation. This mix is one reason the crisis became so destabilizing. If only outsiders had been named, the village might have preserved a stronger sense of internal safety. Instead, suspicion crossed boundaries. It touched people who had shared worship, traded goods, raised children, and lived near one another for years. The accused were not a single type. Their variety reveals how fear can widen once a community accepts the idea of hidden guilt. At first, suspicion may seem to follow familiar prejudices. Over time, it can reach into the center. Salem's accused were both marginal and familiar, which made the crisis feel less like exclusion and more like unraveling. Salem shows how certainty can become dangerous without careful evidence. The most unsettling part of the trials is not simply that people were afraid. Fear is a human response to uncertainty. The danger came when fear hardened into certainty before the evidence deserved it. Once officials and neighbors believed they knew what was happening, every new detail could be made to fit the theory. Denials sounded like lies. Distress sounded like proof. Doubt sounded like weakness. This is why Salem remains so useful as a warning. It shows how the mind can confuse confidence with truth. Careful evidence slows that process. It forces questions. It protects the unpopular and the misunderstood. It gives accused people a way to answer. Without it, a community may feel righteous while moving toward injustice. Salem's power lies in this simple but difficult lesson. The stronger our certainty feels, the more carefully we should ask what supports it. The crisis reveals how communities can turn anxiety into accusation. Anxiety often begins without a clear target. It is a sense that something is wrong, that danger is near, or that familiar life has become unstable. Communities under pressure may try to solve that feeling by naming a cause. In Salem, accusation gave anxiety a direction. It turned unease into a story with villains, witnesses, and official action. That can feel relieving at first because it replaces confusion with apparent clarity. But the relief is dangerous if the chosen explanation is false. Then each accusation creates more fear, and each fear demands another answer. Salem shows how a group can move from uncertainty to blame through steps that feel reasonable to those inside the moment. This pattern is not limited to the 17th century. Human beings still search for targets when anxiety becomes too heavy to bear. The lesson is not that communities should ignore fear. It is that fear must be handled with care. Every surviving testimony offers a small window into colonial life. The testimonies are valuable not only because they describe the trials. They also reveal the texture of everyday New England. Inside them are references to kitchens, fields, roads, animals, debts, illnesses, weather, church attendance, family visits, and neighborhood talk. These details appear because people were trying to explain suspicion, but they accidentally preserved ordinary life. A complaint about a strange event might tell us how people borrowed goods. A remembered conversation might show how households interacted. A statement about a sick cow might reveal the economic importance of livestock. This is one of the wonders of the archive. Even fear can leave behind information about daily existence. The documents allow historians to study a world that was not trying to describe itself for us. It was simply trying to act in a crisis. Through those urgent words, we glimpse the rhythms and pressures of colonial life with unusual closeness. Salem remains haunting because its people were recognizably ordinary. The people involved were not monsters from a distant legend. They were parents, children, ministers, farmers, servants, judges, neighbors, and church members. They worried about status, safety, money, faith, and family. They lived in a world very different from ours, but their emotional lives are not impossible to understand. That is what makes the story linger. If Salem were only about strange beliefs, we could keep it at a comfortable distance. Instead, it shows ordinary human tendencies under extraordinary pressure. People trusted some voices more than others. They feared being deceived. They wanted authorities to act. They struggled to admit error. These patterns still feel familiar. Salem haunts us because it does not require a society of villains. It requires a society of frightened people who believe they are doing right. That recognition is sobering. It brings the past close enough to ask what we might do in our own moments of fear. The deepest lesson of Salem is the need for mercy. After all the documents, debates, names, and memorials, one idea remains. A community can be intelligent, devout, organized, and legally serious, yet still lose sight of mercy when fear takes command. Mercy does not mean ignoring danger. It means remembering the human being before judgment becomes final. It means leaving room for doubt. It means refusing to let panic decide who deserves compassion. Salem's tragedy shows what happens when suspicion moves faster than humility. The accused needed fairness, but they also needed imagination from their neighbors. They needed others to wonder whether the story being told about them might be wrong. That kind of mercy is difficult in any age, because fear asks for speed and certainty. Yet the memory of Salem keeps asking for something slower. It asks us to listen more carefully, judge more cautiously, and protect the vulnerable when a crowd begins to feel sure. That is why Salem still matters. And so we come to the end of our journey through Salem Witchcraft. Tonight, we followed a story that began in a small colonial village, in a season of worry and uncertainty. We saw how fear moved from household to meeting house, from whispered concern to written testimony, from private alarm to public judgment. We met ministers, magistrates, children, neighbors, and families, all caught inside a moment that became larger than any one person could control. We explored how Salem was shaped by belief, by old disputes, by fragile trust, and by a world where unseen danger felt close. We saw how courts tried to make sense of visions and symptoms, how accusations spread beyond one village, and how doubt finally began to return. And in the years that followed, we saw memory do its slower work, through petitions, apologies, memorials, and the careful naming of those who had been wronged. It is a story with shadows, but also with lessons that still feel deeply human. Salem reminds us to move slowly when fear asks us to hurry. It reminds us to listen carefully when certainty grows too loud. And it reminds us that mercy is one of history's most important forms of wisdom. If you enjoyed this sleepy journey through the past, you are warmly invited to like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. And if you happen to still be awake, there should be another gentle history video waiting for you on the screen. But for now, there is nothing more you need to follow. Let the village fade into the distance. Let the old records close. Let the names rest softly in memory. Allow your shoulders to loosen. Let your breathing settle into its own calm rhythm. The day is finished now, and you can let it go. Sleep well, and good night.